Welcome back to our channel, where we uncover the most tangled webs of deceit and desire. Tonight, we delve into a true story that proves love, when twisted by lies, can lead to the darkest of crimes. It's a tragic tale of a seemingly perfect marriage, a forbidden romance, and the horrifying lengths a woman was willing to go to for her freedom. Before we begin, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our deep dives into the criminal mind. Now, let's open the file on the case of Clara and David Sterling. Willow Creek was the kind of town that seemed suspended in time, where every street corner looked like it belonged on a postcard and every home was meticulously manicured, the very definition of suburban perfection. At the heart of this picture-perfect town lived Clara and David Sterling, whose marriage appeared flawless to anyone glancing from the outside. David, a celebrated architect with a string of high-profile projects, was the golden boy of Willow Creek. Handsome, impeccably dressed, and brimming with ambition, he was adored by colleagues, neighbors, and friends alike. Clara, on the other hand, was a talented artist, her quiet elegance a counterpoint to David's commanding presence. Together, they presented the ideal union. Dinner parties with polite laughter, weekend brunches by the bay, vacations perfectly planned down to the minute, and a home that gleamed with the pride of success. Yet, beneath the pristine surface, Clara's life was suffocating. Their home, though beautiful, was a gilded cage, and she felt every bar pressing in with relentless weight. David's affection was as controlling as it was generous. He dictated her schedule, her friendships, even the art she created and displayed. Every choice she made was subtly scrutinized, every whim suppressed, as if her life were an extension of his image rather than her own. She was, in every sense, a trophy, a flawless accessory to his flawless life. Her smiles at dinner parties, her soft laughter at social gatherings, were all masks, carefully crafted to hide the hollow ache gnawing at her from within. Nights were the worst. Lying beside David, she would stare at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster as she counted the lost pieces of herself. The warmth she might have felt in a marriage had long since been replaced by cold obligation and silent endurance. The first real crack in Clara's golden cage came not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a chance encounter at a local art exhibition. Marcus Cole, a sculptor with a bohemian soul, moved through the gallery with casual grace, his hands perpetually smudged with clay, streaks of earthy color marking his skin like a painter's signature. There was something magnetic about him, not the conventional attractiveness of David, but an energy that radiated freedom, danger, and possibility. When Clara's gaze met his across a crowded room, it was as though the air itself shifted. He noticed her immediately not as a beautiful accessory to someone else's life, but as a presence to be understood, a mind to engage, a soul to meet. Their initial conversation was polite, art talk and pleasantries, but there was an undercurrent of electricity, a tension that neither could ignore. Marcus spoke of art not as a commodity or a resume item, but as a living expression of the human spirit. He spoke of feeling, of longing, of the necessity of breaking free from constraints. Clara, long starved for emotional connection and intellectual companionship, felt herself opening, bit by bit, like a flower finally touched by sunlight. She found herself laughing at his jokes in a way that was natural, spontaneous, and entirely new. For the first time in years, she was not the woman David expected her to be. She was simply Clara. After the gallery, their meetings became frequent and increasingly clandestine. Coffee turned into long walks along the river, shared lunches in hidden corners of town, and quiet evenings spent in Marcus's studio, surrounded by half-finished sculptures and the scent of wet clay. Every conversation deepened the bond, revealing shared loneliness, suppressed dreams, and a hunger for freedom neither had fully admitted. The contrast with David could not have been starker. While David's love came wrapped in control, precision, and polished words, Marcus's presence was chaos, unpredictability, and raw honesty. He challenged her, ignited her imagination, and, most dangerously of all, made her feel alive again. Clara tried to deny the magnetic pull. She reminded herself of David's generosity, his stability, his carefully curated life. But the golden cage grew heavier each day. Every smile she offered David felt false, every touch a performance. Thoughts of Marcus began to invade her dreams, painting them with color and movement she had long forgotten. She imagined herself walking hand in hand with him through sunlit streets, laughing, unbound, free from the invisible chains that bound her to a life that looked perfect but felt hollow. The tension escalated with every secret meeting. Clara's heart raced at the thought of being discovered, of the scandal that could ruin everything, yet the fear was eclipsed by the thrill. Her mind was a storm, torn between duty, desire, and desperation. David remained oblivious, engrossed in his own world of deadlines and accolades, unaware that the foundation of his carefully constructed life was beginning to crack. The golden cage was no longer just a metaphor. It was a prison she yearned to escape, and Marcus was the key. It started innocently, an extra glance lingering a moment too long, a subtle touch grazing her hand, but soon, it was undeniable. The fire of attraction, stoked by loneliness and longing, had ignited into a consuming blaze. Clara knew she was walking a perilous line, but the thrill of rebellion, the intoxicating sensation of being truly seen and understood, was impossible to resist. Each clandestine encounter was both a lifeline and a step toward disaster, and with every stolen moment, the inevitability of confrontation loomed, an invisible predator waiting just around the corner. In the heart of Willow Creek, behind the pristine facade and the white picket fences, Clara's life had become a dangerous game of desire, secrecy, and rebellion. The golden cage glimmered beautifully from the outside, but inside, it was burning her alive, and she was powerless to stop the flames. The illicit affair between Clara and Marcus blossomed in the shadowed corners of Willow Creek, carefully hidden from the watchful eyes of a small-town community that thrived on gossip and appearances. Every encounter was a calculated risk, each meeting cloaked in secrecy and suffused with a dangerous thrill. Marcus's studio, perched on the outskirts of town amid untamed greenery, became their sanctuary, a place saturated with the earthy scent of clay, the faint metallic tang of sculpting tools, and an almost palpable promise of freedom from David's omnipresent control. Here, Clara could finally exhale, shed the armor she wore in her pristine home, and exist as someone beyond the carefully constructed image of a dutiful wife. Their affair was never merely physical. It was an intricate tapestry of emotional intimacy, a bond woven from shared loneliness, unspoken yearnings, and the intoxicating recognition of a kindred spirit. Hours would pass unnoticed as they spoke of everything they could never say to David: the suffocating demands, the cold expectations, the loss of identity that weighed on Clara like chains. Marcus listened with an intensity that made her feel seen, acknowledged, and alive, and in turn, he revealed the vulnerabilities he had hidden from the world, fears and desires that made his bohemian freedom feel fragile and precious. Their connection grew, becoming a dangerous mix of passion and intellectual intimacy that neither could resist. Yet, with each secret meeting, the web of lies Clara spun grew ever more complex. Dinner invitations became feigned obligations. Art classes were invented with meticulous detail. Late-night grocery runs served as cover for stolen hours with Marcus. Each deception required precise timing, careful storytelling, and an unrelenting mental acrobatics to keep her true activities hidden from David's scrutinizing eyes. She became an expert in subterfuge, her mind constantly mapping out contingencies, rehearsing plausible explanations, and weaving intricate tales of innocence to conceal a life increasingly dominated by deceit. The thrill of these lies was intoxicating, but so too was the gnawing anxiety that one slip, one misplaced word or forgotten appointment, could expose everything. Meanwhile, David remained frustratingly oblivious, wrapped in his own world of architectural blueprints, deadlines, and civic recognition. He noticed Clara's energy, her renewed liveliness, and interpreted it as a mark of his generosity, a sign that he was providing her with the independence she needed. To him, her bright eyes, her late-night excitement, and the subtle smiles that occasionally played across her lips were affirmations of a successful marriage. He had no inkling that these small, seemingly innocuous changes were symptoms of a relationship quietly unraveling, that his control had been circumvented by the magnetic pull of another man. As the affair deepened, so too did the danger. The line between desire and recklessness blurred with each stolen moment, and the stakes escalated. Each clandestine encounter carried the constant, suffocating threat of discovery. Yet paradoxically, this threat intensified the allure. In Marcus's presence, Clara experienced a liberation that was impossible to articulate, a sensation that made every risk feel worth taking, and every lie feel justified. The two of them began to see their love not as an illicit sin but as a moral imperative, a right to existence and passion denied by circumstance. David, they decided almost with a perverse clarity, was the sole impediment to their happiness, the barrier standing between their fantasies and reality. Whispers in dark corners evolved into full-blown discussions, laden with unspoken possibilities. They began to imagine scenarios, initially idle thoughts that lingered in the margins of conversation, and then grew bolder, darker, more urgent. How could the obstacle the man they once called husband, once a friend, be removed without implicating them? The conversations were hushed, spoken with a mixture of excitement and terror, punctuated by nervous laughter that barely concealed the gravity of their intent. Each word, each glance, carried the weight of potential consequences. Yet the sense of inevitability was intoxicating. Every moment Clara spent with Marcus reinforced the belief that their destiny was intertwined, that their happiness was a tangible prize waiting just beyond the constraints of morality and law. In the shadowed hours of night, Clara would lie awake, heart pounding, mind racing with images of what could come. The gilded cage of her life with David pressed ever tighter around her chest. Each polished meal and curated social interaction, a reminder of the suffocating control she had endured. Marcus, with his untamed spirit, his hands streaked with clay, and his fearless approach to life, had become her escape, her mirror, and, dangerously, her accomplice in a moral descent she had never imagined possible. Desire, fear, and ambition entwined until it was impossible to discern right from wrong, love from obsession, or freedom from destruction. Every whispered word, every furtive touch, and every clandestine meeting drew them closer to a point of no return. The tension between their yearning and the societal and marital constraints around them had reached a fever pitch. A storm was brewing, invisible but unstoppable, threatening to shatter not only the facade of the sterling marriage but the very moral fabric of Willow Creek itself. And within the quiet, manicured streets of the town, nobody, not friends, not neighbors, not even David himself, could see the tempest gathering behind closed doors until it was too late. The whispers that once lingered in shadowed corners of Marcus's studio had evolved into a plan, dark and methodical, born from a twisted cocktail of desire, desperation, and delusion. Each clandestine meeting between Clara and Marcus now carried an unspoken weight, the air thick with anticipation and fear, a simmering tension that neither dared fully acknowledge. Their love, once a refuge, had become a prison of obsession, driving them to consider acts that no rational mind could condone. David was no longer a husband, a man they had once vowed to honor, but a barrier, a living embodiment of everything they had been denied, everything they craved, and everything that now, in their warped perception, justified extreme action. In the dim light of the studio, Clara traced the contours of Marcus's latest sculpture, yet her mind was far from the art before her. She envisioned David's expression, the fury and disbelief that would cross his face when confronted with their betrayal. And with that image came a dark, intoxicating thrill, the realization that they could reshape their lives, erase the cage that had suffocated her for years. The couple had convinced themselves they were not criminals, but survivors of circumstance, forced into a cruel morality where love and freedom could only be secured by eliminating the one man who had ever dictated the terms of their existence. Each whispered conversation, each furtive glance, had slowly honed the contours of their plan, refining it into a horrifyingly precise instrument. They began by enumerating possibilities, each one more sinister than the last. A staged accident seemed simple but unpredictable, too many variables that could expose them. Poisoning David over time was considered, but Marcus, with his meticulous attention to detail, feared the subtle signs, the chance that it might be traced back to them. They discussed subtle manipulations, attempts at psychological coercion, but these all felt inadequate. Each rejected idea only drove them deeper into obsession, sharpening their focus on one singular vision. An act so meticulously executed that it would appear as self-defense, as fate rather than intent. Marcus, always the strategist, drew upon an almost obsessive knowledge of tools, chemicals, and human psychology. His studio became a war room, sketches and notes scattered across the work tables. Each detail considered, every contingency accounted for. He considered Clara's demeanor, her grace under pressure, and how easily she could manipulate perception. Together, they imagined scenarios in which David would confront them righteous. Enraged, unknowing they would turn that fury against him. The plan became an elaborate choreography. The confrontation would occur in the studio, the place where Clara and Marcus felt safest and most in control. David's expected aggression would be the trigger, Clara's prearranged weapon the instrument of finality, and the staged struggle the alibi that transformed cold-blooded murder into a defensible act of self-preservation. They rehearsed the plan in hushed tones, each step repeated until it felt as inevitable as the rising sun. Marcus instructed Clara on how to react, what words to speak, how to position herself and David, the angles of the struggle, even the expected sound of their footsteps and the placement of furniture to support their story. Clara, though horrified by the thought of taking a life, felt an equal measure of exhilaration. The plan was as elegant as it was cruel, a perverse reflection of their entwined desires, freedom, passion, and the belief that they were justified in bending morality to their will. In the quiet aftermath of their planning sessions, as Marcus cleaned clay from his hands and Clara sat staring at the floor, the magnitude of their intent began to settle in. The golden cage, once gilded with comfort and appearances, now loomed oppressively, a reminder of every moment of control, every stifled aspiration, every subtle insult to her autonomy. Yet, the sense of liberation they imagined the life they would claim after David was gone was intoxicating. Fear had transformed into anticipation, dread into purpose. Each night, Clara lay awake, imagining the confrontation in meticulous detail, the shock, the struggle, the finality. Every heartbeat in that vision felt real, a visceral pulse of forbidden possibility. Even as doubt occasionally flickered at the edges of her consciousness, Marcus's calm, calculating demeanor reinforced their resolve. He spoke of inevitability, of destiny, framing their act not as murder, but as a necessary reclamation of life and love. In the echoing silence of the studio, their whispered affirmations solidified into conviction. They were no longer two lovers in hiding. They were conspirators, architects of a dark liberation, poised on the brink of an act that would forever transform them and the world around them. The air was taut with tension, charged with the promise of violence cloaked in righteousness. And in that charged space, Clara felt both fear and a twisted exhilaration. The cage would be shattered, and with it, the life she had longed for could finally begin. The night of the murder was nothing short of apocalyptic, a perfect mirror to the tempest raging within Clara's soul. Outside, a violent thunderstorm had descended upon Willow Creek, sheets of rain hammering against the windows and puddles forming rapidly on the cobblestone streets. Lightning cleaved the sky, momentarily revealing the stark outlines of the studio and the darkened figures within, while thunder rolled like the drumming of some ancient, vengeful god. The storm seemed almost sentient, as though nature itself had sensed the malevolence that would unfold within those walls. Each gust of wind whistling through the cracks in the door was like the whispered omen of a foreboding spirit, carrying with it a bone-chilling coldness and the heavy weight of a grim destiny. Clara had orchestrated every detail with the precision of a masterful manipulator, each step carefully calculated like a game of life-or-death chess. Earlier that evening, she had sent David a text, feigning urgency, claiming she needed his assistance with moving one of her larger sculptures, a meticulously fabricated excuse crafted to lure him into the deadly trap. David, blinded by his habitual confidence and a possessive, almost arrogant belief in his control over Clara's life, accepted without hesitation. There was a certain disdainful arrogance in his step as he approached the studio, a sense of inevitability that he would dominate whatever minor inconvenience his wife had contrived. He had no idea that the walls he thought were familiar and safe were about to become a tomb. The dismissive smirk on his lips, as he contemplated Clara's fragility, was the prelude to an irreversible tragedy. Inside, Marcus waited, concealed in the deepest shadows, a silhouette carved from obsession and cold, calculated rage. He held his breath, each beat of his heart sounding like a death knell in the eerily silent space. Clara's heart pounded, a potent mix of fear and anticipation, as she watched David step through the threshold. The storm's flickering light intermittently revealed his smile, oblivious, trusting, and tragically naive. The room seemed to constrict, the scent of wet clay and turpentine blending with the metallic tang of adrenaline that Clara could almost taste. In that instant, the quiet, controlled world they had meticulously prepared collided with the raw, chaotic reality of what they were about to do. The air hung thick, as if being squeezed by an invisible hand, signaling the imminent explosion of something truly horrific. The confrontation was brief, brutal, and horrifying in its efficiency. David's initial confusion and anger gave way to disbelief as Marcus stepped forward, and the two conspirators moved with synchronized precision. Clara's hands, trained in the ritual of careful deception, executed actions she would later convince herself were forced by necessity, not choice. The struggle was a cacophony drowned out by the thunderclaps, the storm acting as a shroud to mask the sounds of desperate breaths and the violent meeting of flesh and intent. Survival instinct surged within David, but it was too late. Time itself seemed to warp the moments stretching into an eternity, punctuated by flashes of lightning that exposed David's final expressions of shock, disbelief, and agonizing betrayal. His eyes, wide with horror, locked onto Clara, holding a silent question, an unspoken accusation. When it was over, the studio was utterly transformed. What had been a sanctuary of art and expression was now a scene of horror, a canvas painted in blood and fear. The lovers, bound together by the heinous act, moved quickly, deliberately. David's body was positioned to suggest a chaotic, passionate altercation. Furniture was overturned, canvases smeared with hastily applied marks, and a bloodied tool placed in Clara's hand as though fate itself had chosen her as its instrument. Every detail was choreographed to perfection, every element designed to convince any observer of the story they would tell. The pungent coppery smell of blood mingled with the scent of clay and the dampness of the storm, creating a suffocating, haunting atmosphere. Clara's hands trembled, not from guilt, but from the adrenaline of execution and the thrill of mastery. She dialed the police, her voice quivering with the carefully cultivated tone of terror and shock. He found out, she stammered. He attacked me. I had no choice. I had to defend myself. The storm outside punctuated her words, a natural accompaniment to the fabricated tale of domestic passion. Each crack of thunder seemed to lend an eerie authenticity to Clara's performance, crafting a perfect picture of a helpless wife driven to extremes. The responding officers arrived quickly, the wailing sirens mingling with the roar of the storm. They found Clara in the center of the room, disheveled, eyes wide, voice trembling, the scene of carnage around her. In their eyes, the narrative was coherent. A husband, consumed by jealousy and rage, had attacked his wife. She had defended herself. Every piece of evidence, meticulously staged, supported this illusion. The storm, the scene, and Clara's performance converged into a perfect story, one that obscured the cold, deliberate murder beneath layers of deception. Not a single officer suspected the profound deceit lurking beneath the pitiful facade of this woman. Yet, as they left the studio that night, the two conspirators felt a shiver of unease. The storm raged on, relentless and unjudging, and in its thunderous percussion lay a subtle reminder. No lie, no matter how meticulously crafted, can ever be fully contained. Like the body they had manipulated into silence, the truth had a stubborn persistence, and the shadows of their actions would stretch long into the nights to come. Freedom, they realized, came at a price, and the price was not merely the life they had taken, but the crushing weight of the secret that would gnaw at them, unrelenting, for the rest of their days. Each raindrop, each flash of lightning, served as a relentless echo of their crime, a never-ending sentence of conscience. Would you like me to generate an image to illustrate this story? I could create a depiction of the studio during the storm, or perhaps Clara and Marcus after the act. The investigation into David Sterling's death began under the careful guise of procedural routine, a formal dance of empathy and subtle scrutiny that concealed the simmering tension beneath the surface. Detective Samuel Miller, a seasoned investigator whose career had been forged in the relentless crucible of homicides, domestic violence, and cases that blurred the line between passion and crime, approached the Sterling case with a blend of patience and wariness honed over decades. He had long since learned to trust the quiet instincts that whispered truths beneath polished exteriors. And from the very first moment Clara Sterling recounted the events of that storm-laden night, Miller sensed that the narrative he was being offered was not an innocent chronicle of terror, but a carefully composed performancia play of grief and fear choreographed to perfection. Clara's voice trembled, undeniably, but not with genuine panic. The quiver was deliberate, controlled, the kind that could only be practiced in the isolation of one's mind, rehearsed in secret hours, perfecting the cadence and timing of a tragedy she intended others to believe. Her eyes, wide and seemingly haunted, betrayed no tears, no natural wetness of grief, no subtle swell of emotion that would have punctuated true horror. Her movements were precise, almost ritualistic, as if she were a dancer performing a script written not for herself but for an audience she longed to deceive. Every gesture, every falter of breath, every barely audible intake of air had been honed to produce maximum effect, yet beneath the polished exterior, Miller noted a mechanical rhythm and absence of true chaos, an unnerving precision that suggested calculation rather than despair. He began his questioning, employing a method he had perfected over years: patience, silence, and carefully calibrated pressure. Open-ended queries were his tools, each designed to dig into the cracks of a narrative that was almost too flawless. "How exactly did he strike you?" he asked, letting the pause linger until Clara filled it with her own carefully curated words. "Where were you standing when this happened? Could you describe every movement, every sound, every flash of the storm?" To the casual observer, she appeared fragile, a grieving wife trapped in a nightmare. To Miller, she was a performer, delivering lines rehearsed to perfection, maintaining a delicate equilibrium that could shatter at any moment. Subtle inconsistencies began to reveal themselves: a hesitation that lasted a heartbeat too long, an awkwardly precise phrase, an avoidance of details that would naturally spill forth in genuine trauma. All of it was meticulously catalogued by Miller. He visualized each response as a piece of a complex jigsaw puzzle that refused to coalesce, each piece an anomaly in an otherwise pristine narrative. The detective knew that, beneath the surface, a far darker reality was taking shape, one of deliberate design and perverse intention. The next critical step was Marcus Cole, Clara's lover, and the architect of the clandestine relationship that had festered beneath Willow Creek's idyllic surface. Bringing Marcus into the station was a calculated risk, fraught with uncertainty. He was a man accustomed to freedom of expression, a sculptor who spent hours molding clay into shapes dictated by neither morality nor convention, yet his world of creative liberty had ill-prepared him for the cold, analytical gaze of a detective seasoned in peeling away layers of deception. Initially, Marcus mirrored Clara's carefully crafted account. He nodded when she had spoken, filling in the smallest gaps with gentle affirmations, parroting rehearsed phrases designed to solidify their narrative. But Miller's relentless, surgical questioning began to expose cracks in the armor. Contradictions emerged like fissures in stone. Marcus claimed to have been elsewhere during critical moments, yet call logs placed him firmly at the studio, within the precise window of David's death. Details of the supposed confrontation differed from Clara's story, slight discrepancies in timing, positioning, and reaction, each seemingly minor but cumulatively devastating. The more Miller pressed, the wider the chasm of doubt became, expanding into a canyon of suspicion that could not be ignored. Over the following days, Miller immersed himself in a meticulous reconstruction of events, cross-referencing timelines, phone records, text messages, and receipts. The layers of deceit were almost breathtaking in their audacity. Texts revealed months of clandestine communication. Coded references, intimate expressions of desire, orchestrated plans for secret meetings, all meticulously hidden from the scrutiny of friends, family, and law enforcement. Call logs demonstrated deliberate manipulation. Marcus arranging studio visits under false pretenses, Clara constructing airtight alibis, a carefully choreographed ballet of deception designed to convince anyone investigating that David's death was sudden, unplanned, and born of an impulsive altercation. Even mundane evidence became damning in the context of their orchestrated narrative. Receipts for chemical solvents, sculpting tools, and materials unrelated to Clara's artistic pursuits painted a portrait of preparation. The studio itself, cleaned with obsessive thoroughness after the storm, was a stage set to support a story of passion-driven self-defense rather than premeditated homicide. Every small detail, every seemingly innocuous choice, when scrutinized against the backdrop of the affair and their shared motive, became a damning testament to forethought and cold-blooded intent. The breakthrough arrived through instinct, the kind honed by decades of experience. Miller returned to the studio, methodically examining each corner, each canvas, each crevice. And there, on the back of a half-finished sculpture, written in hurried, almost desperate handwriting, lay the final confession. Marcus's own admission, encoded in the medium he knew best. The words were stark, chilling, and unambiguous, a confession not designed to be found by anyone, yet discovered by the persistent intuition of a detective who trusted the subtle pulse of truth over appearances. Faced with the mounting weight of evidence, Clara and Marcus could no longer maintain their fragile facade. The carefully constructed lattice of lies unraveled under Miller's relentless scrutiny. Their gestures faltered, their eyes betrayed the fear they had so long masked, and the cool, confident exterior that had shielded them from suspicion collapsed. The golden cage of their shared secret, built from desire, manipulation, and cold rationalization, shattered in an instant, replaced by the unyielding reality of consequences. The arrests were swift, deliberate, and public, a culmination of weeks of painstaking investigation. As Clara and Marcus were led away in handcuffs, the community of Willow Creek recoiled, grappling with the magnitude of betrayal. The seemingly perfect couple, bound by love and lust, had transformed private passion into calculated, deliberate murder. What had once been a gilded romance became a cautionary tale, a haunting reminder that love, when twisted by obsession and rationalized by delusion, could become a weapon of horrifying precision. Even in the quiet of the police station, long after the suspects had been secured, Miller felt a lingering unease settle deep in his chest. The meticulous planning, the audacity of their actions, the cold rationale behind the crime all revealed a truth both simple and terrifying. Human desire, untethered from conscience, could produce monsters cloaked in beauty, civility, and charm. The case would haunt him, long after the headlines faded and the town returned to its veneer of normalcy, serving as a chilling testament to the lengths to which passion, when unrestrained, could lead. In the shadow of Willow Creek's perfect facades, Miller could not forget the calculated precision of the murder, the intimacy of betrayal, or the perverse artistry with which love had been twisted into death. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of Clara and Marcus not as a couple in love, but as architects of horror, the tragic and terrifying embodiment of desire taken too far, a grim reflection of humanity's capacity for darkness hidden behind beauty.